Literature has been a part of human race since the very inception of mankind. Now, there have been Greek literature, there's Roman literature, and so on. Talking about English literature specifically, which is very much in our course and relevant for today's lesson, we'll be talking that how thousands of years literature has been divided into specific periods so that we as students, as scholars of literature are able to understand that how every age had its particular features, what writings were developed, how English literature developed as a core subject, and how it entered the universities and colleges, and what kind of writing is being written now in the contemporary postmodern era. Okay, so navigating literature from the very beginning, from the Anglo-Saxon period, which began around 5th century, because yes, if we talk about English literature, the beginnings are around 5th century till the 9th, 10th century, and then we move towards the other era. So let's go ahead with today's lesson, 1000 years of English literature, every age explained. Okay, so guys, this is a lesson, a very important, vital lesson, giving you an overview, a very holistic view of how English literature begins and how it is in today's time. All right, how it began and how it is in today's time. So guys, talking about the very first period, that is the Anglo-Saxon period. I'm talking about this CE, that is Christ era, the era that we are living in. So that is the Anglo-Saxon period, the year 450 to 1066, a very important, vital period. This was the time when the tribes like Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, they entered from various parts of Europe, from various parts of Germany and so many other places, and they entered Britain. Now, during this period, the Roman Empire was withdrawing itself. The Roman soldiers were withdrawing itself, and tribal invasion was happening in England. Now, these tribes, Angles, Saxon, Jutes, they played a very, very important role in establishing what we today know as Britain, and how they influenced the culture, the art, the literature of that period. Now, when we talk about the 5th century, what do you get in mind? Do you think that the society, that the human race was so developed? Not at all. There were wars, there were invasions happening, there were expansions happening, one tribe in war with the other, regions in war with the other. So yes, when we talk about literature, do you think that literature is going to be about anything else but war? Yes, so that time, one of the most important aspect of literature at that time was war poetry, heroic poetry, hero worshipping poetry, all those poetry that talked about courage, valor, and all those, and patriotism, and how it kind of identified itself with that era. So always remember, whatever the society, whatever the period features of that time, will always be the literature, because literature is nothing but the mirror of the society. After, like, if we talk about today's time, 100 years later, if anybody would be studying literature of this time, what would they be talking about? There's digital age. So literature of today's time talks about maybe digital age. 3 years back, it was so much else. There would be so much of writing talking about corona. Okay, so yes, literature, this is how, people at that time will be able to understand us. So coming back to the Anglo-Saxon era, when we talk about, then remember key features. Was there any paper? Was there any pen to write? Nothing as such. It was an oral tradition. Literature was being passed from one generation to the other orally. All right, so oral tradition and alliterative verse dominated the period. जब oral tradition होगा, जब verses हमारे pass down होंगी, तो क्या इतना आसान होता है याद करना? Alliteration जब होता है, तब आसान होता है. What is alliteration? Alliteration is like, I'm sure everybody has heard of, like, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. Okay, when the consonants are repeating itself again and again. Okay, so ये alliteration होता था, इस तरह का आसान होता था याद करना. This is the reason orally ये pass on कर सकते थे. अभी तक कोई ये नहीं कि किसने लिखा है. Anonymous writer होते थे. ये नहीं था कि लिख के याद करना है. It was just passed from one person to another. Okay, so heroic and elegiac themes reflect warrior culture. War at that time were happening, warrior culture. So heroic themes, valence, bravery, hero worship, all these were elements. Pagan values merged with emerging Christianity. Remember, guys, we're talking about the 5th century. At that time, Christianity was spreading rapidly. And that was also time when the pagan elements, because there was paganism, we all know that how paganism was being worshipped at that time. So paganism combined with Christianity, and that was a period that, how literature developed during that period. Use of kennings and caesura in poetic form, and limited female representation focused on just the communal life, the life of the society and everything. That was the period of the Anglo-Saxon period. Next we have, and that is, okay, so we are quickly going to talk about the text of that time. कौन से famous text है उस time के? Beowulf, again about hero worship, heroic elements. So written around 7 to 750, and an old English epic poem narrating the hero Beowulf's battles with Grendel, that was the monster, and then Grendel's mother. So it was about that, how Beowulf was a very strong character, a very strong hero who later became the king, and he was the one who fought with Grendel the monster, who saved the people of his of the kingdom, and saved and helped them in just getting rid of this monster. Now remember one thing, again Beowulf was an oral tradition work, and this was very later, around in the 8th, 9th century, that it was kind of documented, it was archived. Also, we do not know who wrote it, because it did not matter that who wrote the poem. Anonymity was a very normal thing, that who's writing we do not know. So Beowulf the Wanderer then comes in next. Again, a melancholic elegy of exile and lost kinship. So can you see elegy क्या होता है? जब किसी की डेथ हो जाती है तो उसके ऊपर जो sad poem लिखते हैं. तो जो उस time का period था, it was all about elegies, it was about wars, people dying, companionship, kinship, losing friends, losing kingdoms. Then there is seafarer, explores isolation and spiritual longing through a sailor's journey. The seafarer, as the name suggests, sea pe koi hai, that person is longing for the friends, for the normal life that he used to live, he's contemplating what is life and all. Then the Battle of Maldon, can you see again, the Battle of Maldon, again is about war, a historical poem memorializing a real battle. And then Cadman Hymn. Now Cadman Hymn was a very important work, guys. Why? Because this was a miraculous work. Cadman Hymn is kind of documented the first work which said that ye Cadman ne likha hai, Cadman's Hymn. Who was Cadman? So Cadman was this dumb mute person who used to live in a monastery. So ye nuns or monks ke saath, sisters ke saath rehte the. And he used to just be a normal working person, sweeping the floors or cleaning the churchyard or something like that. One day, all of a sudden, an uneducated person, has no idea, never used to talk or speak. So he was just doing one thing when he was sitting, and all of a sudden he started singing hymns in praise of God. Okay, so that was a miracle. Everybody around him was shocked that, how is it happening? And the voice that he had, the works that he wrote, they were very famous, and they're actually very, very beautiful. They're still documented, and they're still in the archives of the British museums, and it's a very, very important one. This is the reason Cadman Hymn became a very seminal poet of that period, because of miraculous reasons as well as for the poetry that he wrote. Okay, then moving ahead, we have coming to the 1066 to 1500, that was the Middle English period. Now, rise of vernacular English post-Norman conquest. Now, why 1066? 1066 is the period jab Battle of Hastings hua tha, and French rulers came over. Norman conquest hua, and the French rulers came over, and this was the period when things completely changed for England. So courtly love and chivalric romance started flourishing. Okay, so अब धीरे धीरे, क्योंकि नॉर्मन कॉन्क्वेस्ट इतना ज़्यादा हैवी था कि उसके बाद स्टेबिलिटी आ गई. जब स्टेबिलिटी आएगी तो विल वी टॉक अबाउट वॉर्स? नो. वॉर्स एक टाइम पे बार बार हो रही थी, मे बी every second year things were happening. So the mindset was this. But now things had stabilized. Now the inclination was towards something that was romantic, love poetry, courtly love poetry, chivalric romances. What are chivalric romances? Chivalric romances is like the lover is pursuing the beloved जो है वो मान नहीं रही है या मना कर रही है मिलने से, something like that. Very sweet love poetry that used to be there. So courtly love and chivalric romances used to flourish at that time. Religious and didactic, always religion was an important period, at least in the Middle English. अभी भी religious works होते हैं, but at that time they were more, because इसके अलावा कुछ काम ही नहीं था. There was nothing other, there was no entertainment. It was only religion, and religion was at a steep rise at that time. So religious and didactic literature. What is didactic literature? वो literature जो आपको moral सिखाता हो, morals पढ़ाता हो, समझाता हो. Okay, didactic literature, allegory and personification, and growth of narrative poetry. Sorry guys. So growth of narrative poetry and prose. Then you have, let's talk about the representative text. So Middle English period was a period जहाँ पे हमारे ने देखा है कि yes, English literature as a as a literary work of literary text, that started kind of developing further. Who is known as the father of English literature, and that is Chaucer. Chaucer का जब Canterbury Tales आया, Canterbury जब Tales आया Geoffrey Chaucer का 1387 में, this was a framed narrative in which this was a work in which there are many stories told. So these people, there are around 31 people, they are traveling to Canterbury. Canterbury एक है थॉमस, सेंट थॉमस बेकेट के वो श्राइन पे जा रहे हैं, कैंटरबरी जा रहे हैं, एंड वहां पे ये सारे पिलग्रिम साथ में मिलके डिसाइड करते हैं कि लेट्स टेल स्टोरी, 2 stories every person would be telling on the way to the Canterbury and then coming back. So ये इनकम्प्लीट वर्क है चौसर का, लेकिन चौसर ने ये जब लिखा, so he came out to be as a genius because there are so many characters, all the characters belonging to different strata of society, such wonderful stories that are being told, very society driven, मतलब society के irony के बारे में, मतलब societal ironies के बारे में, hypocrisy के बारे में. So kind of that work that emerged to be very fantastic. Still it is in the course of universities. अगर आप लोग English majors किया है, honors किया है, masters किया है, you would be aware of Chaucer, the father of English literature. So now Canterbury Tales का एक और important element है guys कि Chaucer chose to write in East Midland dialect. That was a dialect that further developed into the modern English language that we speak. Now, why is it so? Because Chaucer was a very seminal writer of that time. And when he chose to write this, it was a very conscious choice. क्योंकि उस टाइम पे ना फ्रेंच बहुत ज़्यादा लिखी जा रही थी, लैटिन भी बोली जा रही थी. इंग्लिश वॉज अ लैंग्वेज ऑफ द मासेस, क्योंकि फ्रेंच रूलर्स थे, तो एरिस्टोक्रेसी, रॉयल्टी, मोनार्की, दे ऑल यूज्ड टू स्पीक फ्रेंच. लेकिन मासेस जो डाउन ट्रॉडन थे, दे यूज्ड टू स्पीक इंग्लिश. बट Chaucer very meticulously, very sharply decided कि नहीं, मेरा वर्क तो मासेस के तक जाना चाहिए, तो मेरा वर्क उसने इंग्लिश ईस्ट मिडल डायलेक्ट में लिखा. सो दिस वाज अ गेम चेंजर फॉर इंग्लिश. वाई? बिकॉज देन आफ्टरवर्ड्स चॉसर के बाद जितने राइटर्स आए थे, दे चोज टू राइट इन ईस्ट मिडलैंड डायलेक्ट, एंड देन दैट dialect popularized and it became into the modern English that we speak. Imagine if Chaucer, who was so popular, had chosen some other language. Things would have been very different. Okay. So Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a chivalric romance exploring honor, temptation, supernatural traits. ये अलग एक और work था. Anonymous. पियर्स प्लोमन या विलियम लैंगलैंड का वर्क था. क्रिश्चियन एलिमेंट्स थे, मॉरलिस्टिक एलिमेंट्स थे, डायडैक्टिक एलिमेंट्स थे, सिखा रहे थे कि कैसे जीना चाहिए, व्हाट अ गुड पायस पर्सन इज. द बुक ऑफ मार्जरी केम्प, दिस वाज द फर्स्ट ऑटोबायोग्राफी इन इंग्लिश एंड रिवीलिंग मिसेस एंड फीमेल स्पिरिचुअलिटी. ये एक फीमेल ऑथर के ऊपर वर्क था गाइज, एंड ने लिखा था ये द बुक ऑफ मार्जरी केम्प, उनका नाम था. फर्स्ट ऑटोबायोग्राफी आप कह सकते हैं. एंड मॉड दी अर्थ, सर थॉमस मैलरी का वर्क था. अगेन अ प्रोज रीटेलिंग ऑफ अर्थरियन लेजेंड्स. बाद में जाके अर्थरियन लेजेंड्स इतने ज़्यादा स्ट्रॉन्ग मिथिकल एलिमेंट बन गया था ये, दैट कि चाहे वो T.S. Eliot हो, लॉर्ड एल्फ्रेड टेनिसन हो, दीज पीपल यूज अर्थरियन लेजेंड्स अ लॉट इन देयर वर्क. सो येस, ऑल दीज आर वेरी सेमिनल works. Now moving ahead from the next to the next period, that is the Renaissance, the early modern period. If we say modern period, why? Because it was much modern as compared to the Middle Ages, but not the modern period that we're talking about right now. क्योंकि ये हमारा पोस्ट मॉडर्न पीरियड चल रहा है, तो वो अलग है. ये रेनेसा पीरियड हम बोलेंगे इसको. रेनेसा ऑल्सो नोन एज रिफॉर्मेशन पीरियड. सो थिंग्स कंप्लीटली चेंज ड्यूरिंग दैट टाइम. सो रेनेसा बेसिकली स्टार्टेड इन इटली, okay, with the fall of Constantinople, when the Turks kind of invaded Constantinople, and the Europeans, especially we have the Italian scholars that just fled away from there. वो scholars now across Europe चले गए, and when they came to England also, and they brought new education, new knowledge, new value, and the way to look at life that affected England a lot. And this is how the Renaissance developed, and it impacted literature, it impacted the way of life, it impacted everything. So key features, humanism and classical revival. So इसमें क्या हुआ कि humanism मतलब human पे focus करना, that human is the center of the universe. The man has been, the entire universe has been created for the benefit of the man. This became the core value of Renaissance, and also classical revival. there was a flashback. It was like looking at the classical writers, Horace, Ovid, Virgil, Homer, Aristotle, Plato. All these classic writers were dug up, and they were like, we need to go back and look at how they're writing. So flourishing of drama and sonnet tradition, and then dramas start flourishing. We know Shakespeare belongs to this era. So Shakespeare, University Wits, Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Kidd, Lodge, and all these playwrights of that era were there in the Renaissance period. Exploration of individual identity and ambition, tensions between religion and emerging science. So science has started developing during the Renaissance period in England, and that kind of affected because now religion was merging with science. A very, very nascent idea, but yes, it has started burgeoning. Now, courtly and metaphysical poetry, right? Metaphysical poetry is important to understand. Why? Because metaphysical poets were the ones जिन्हें wit, intellect और thought and feeling को combine किया था. They were the one talking about the scientific, geographical discoveries, and as well as infusing romantic emotional element in their work. So this is the reason metaphysical poetry, which is very much in the UPSC English literature course, and usme, they talk about that, how they are important in today's time and so on. Okay, so moving ahead, representative text. So there are many. So actually, यहाँ पे मुझे authors के नाम लिखने चाहिए थे, but I've just taken some texts that were there. Shakespeare के जितने भी works हैं, all important. King Lear, Tempest is in your course. It's very important. So yes, Hamlet was there. Hamlet, a very important seminal work. If anybody wants to really go ahead and look at Shakespeare का tragedy works, Hamlet बहुत important work है, ज़रूर पढ़ना. Hamlet है Fairy Queen Edmund Spenser का important work written primarily for Queen Elizabeth. Okay, Fairy Queen इसमें Queen Elizabeth थे. Monarchy को भी तो impress करना होता था. तो Edmund Spenser wrote this work for that. Dr. Faustus Christopher Marlowe का a seminal work talking about the Machiavellian character and how Dr. Faustus ने अपनी जितनी भी उनके knowledge थी उसको कैसे misuse करके he gave his spirit to Satan. Again, a didactic work, have moralistic view towards life, live your life with values. And okay, so this was moralistic, but it's a very entertaining, very interesting play as well. In the university syllabus में बहुत लोगों के बहुत across India, अगर कोई भी university पढ़ाएगा तो Dr. Faustus ज़रूर पढ़ाते हैं वो. Astrophel and Stella, again Sir Philip Sidney का work है, another important writer during that time. It's all about sonnets and poems and beautiful poetry was also being written along with drama. And then The Temple, George Herbert का metaphysical work है. The Temple became a very seminal work. So this also tells us कि ये जो theme है, Temple में it's all religion. So religious themes were also there. So there was entertainment, full on entertainment when we talk about drama, poetry, anything that it is there. Note one thing, novel is still not here. Novel काफी late era में आएगी. हम लोग बात करेंगे जब novel आएगी, लेकिन novel का कोई नामो निशान नहीं था. बस एक थॉमस नैश थे जिन्होंने द अनफॉर्चुनेट ट्रैवलर लिखा था. एक काइंड ऑफ एडवेंचरस वर्क था, एक ट्रैवल बुक थी, वो लिखा था. अदरवाइज नॉवल हैड नो से ओवर हियर. Then moving ahead, you have the neoclassical restoration period. अब धीरे धीरे हम लोग आते हैं toward the restoration period. Restoration period कब आया, कैसे आया, एक छोटी सी कहानी है उसके पीछे. So guys, at that time monarchy को बड़ा question किया जाता था कि monarchy को हटाया जाए. Now हम लोग खुद रूल करेंगे, एक हमारे जनता में से एक लीडर को elect किया जाएगा and that person is going to lead us. Okay, so this was something that happened. Monarchy was in a great jeopardized position. It was being attacked, it was being ridiculed, and finally, in 1649, Charles I was executed, he was killed, and Oliver Cromwell, the one who was elected among the people, he came. But इसमें से सब खुश नहीं थे. A lot of people wanted monarchy to be there, but a lot of people wanted Oliver to be there. Oliver जीत तो गए. Charles I को उन्होंने he executed and he came to the throne and started ruling. But did that rule last? Not at all. Then what happened that in 1659, Oliver Cromwell was executed, and Charles I के जो बेटे थे, Charles II, who had gone to France, he came back and he took over the throne. So monarchy was restored. That is the reason it's called a restoration period. So the neoclassical restoration period, 1660 to 1798. So now things had changed. The society was developing, England was developing. Now there was emphasis on order, reason, and decorum. satire became a very dominant form. Satire क्यों dominant हो गया? Because satire में wit चाहिए होता है, intellect चाहिए होता है. And at that time, the poets had, outgrown all those love, tradition, all those, love, happy poems, and they were coming towards this. Now, imitation of classical models, Dryden, Pope, now more emphasized on Virgil, Ovid, Homer, all the classical writers. Then rise of journalism and prose essays, early development of the English novel. अब यहाँ पे English novel कैसे आएगा हम लोग देखेंगे. But first we will see Paradise Lost, which is very much in your course. There are 12 books, 4 books are in your course. And ये John Milton का very seminal work, it is considered as a literary epic. So these 12 books are very mammoth, full of profundity work है ये. And this is on the fall of Adam and Eve, that how Satan kind of move them towards sin, and how they committed sin under the influence of Satan. So this Paradise Lost is about them, and of course the disobedience of man. The Rape of the Lock is by Alexander Pope. It's a satirical work about two families based on a real incident. Gulliver's Travel, Jonathan Swift, ये तीनों आपके कोर्स में है, ये तीनों वर्क आपके कोर्स में जो फेमस वर्क्स इस टाइम पे. सो गुलिवर्स ट्रैवल्स इज अबाउट जोनाथन स्विफ्ट, एन आयरिश राइटर, वेरी फेमस वर्क, इज वेरी फेमस, टॉक्स अबाउट द hypocrisies of England during that time, okay, in a very satirical manner. The Way of the World, William Congreve ka very famous play written in 1700, and again talks about the pretentiousness, the ostentatious life that English people were living at that time, the discrimination between the high class and the low class. It is also this, where the world is also addressed as the comedy of manners. Comedy of manners is like how the high class society used to behave in a very hypocritical manner. So it's a beautiful play, wonderful, very humorous play, and a very famous one. And Pamela, so this was also a period. So 18th century का beginning was the period जहाँ पे novels आने लगी. क्यों? क्योंकि अब guys printing press बड़ी common हो गई थी, literacy rate बढ़ गया था, people middle class had started reading, okay, and now drama is an entertainment form जहाँ पे आपको जाना पड़ता है, बैठना पड़ता है थिएटर पे, and then आपको entertainment मिले. Novels were happening. Why? Because now literacy rate had increased, education had increased, people wanted to have entertainment, but an isolated way, थोड़े solitary experience के लिए आपने एक novel उठाया, and then you're reading that novel, you're getting entertainment, right? So this idea of how you can have solitary sort of an entertainment, this was burgeoning at that time. The coffee houses that had developed, coffee houses में discourses होने लगे थे, discussions होने लगे थे, newspapers आने लगे थे, periodicals आने लगे थे, and politics के ऊपर discussions होते थे, literary works के ऊपर discussion होते थे. तो एक माहौल बन गया था literature का, and this was a period which was very apt for novels to come. So this was how novels came. And Pamela, Samuel Richardson ki Pamela 1740 is a very seminal work, and he's considered one of the 4 wheels of novels, Samuel Richardson. So Daniel Defoe, Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding, Tobias Smollett, Daniel Defoe, all these were the writers of the 18th century, early 18th century, which played a very seminal role in establishing novel as a genre. Then you have the Romantic period, 1790 to 1837. Romantic period, I'm sure everybody must be aware. Dhire dhire chal ke, now comes the late 18th century. Late 18th century mein revolutions हुए थे, mammoth revolutions. I'm sure as UPSC civil servants, you would be knowing about the French Revolution that happened in 1789, the American Declaration of Independence that happened in 1776. All these revolutions created a very different bent of mind, especially how romantic poets kind of saw. So there was Wordsworth, there was Shelley, Keats, Byron, all these Coleridge, all these poets kind of developed a very different way of looking at life. And jo poetry tha, because romantic age was all about poetry, hardly any novel was written. There was Mary Shelley ki Frankenstein, that was only very very few novels, or maybe Jane Austen ka Pride and Prejudice. Some novels were being written, but yes, poetry overshadowed basically the entire period. So it was very revolutionary, especially the work of P.B. Shelley. Revolutions के बारे में बात होता, questioning the authority. हम क्यों माने आपकी बात को, हम आपको question करेंगे. ये एक यहाँ के you can say एक inclination हो गया था. Now Wordsworth, Coleridge, and all these people, Keats, they also had strong inclination towards nature. नेचर के बारे में बात करना, ह्यूमन एक्सपीरियंस के बारे में बात करना, ऑर्डिनरी भाषा में, ऑर्डिनरी लैंग्वेज में लिखना. They were very much against the decorum, the order, the precision that was being used by previous generation poets, जैसे Dryden and Pope. They were like, why are we using such difficult, meter? Why are we looking at such strategically? Why are we written in a calculative manner? Poetry, as what Wordsworth said in Lyrical Ballet, his manifesto, and he said that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And that is how poetry should be written, in an ordinary language, and it should come as it is coming from the heart, should not be thought much about. And it should focus on human experiences. So we have Lyrical Ballet, Wordsworth का यही work था, 1798 में जो work आया था, that marks the beginning of the Romantic Age. Wordsworth, Frankenstein, Mary Shelley का novel था, as I mentioned. Childe Harold, ये Lord Byron का work था, very seminal work, talks about the different exploits that he had done. A very long poem also. Ode to Nightingale, John Keats का very seminal work. Ode to Nightingale talks about that, again, nature, beauty, truth is beauty, and beauty is true. That's Ode to Nightingale. And the Prelude, William Wordsworth का 1850. So Prelude, William Wordsworth का जो इसका autobiography बोलेंगे, written after his death, and this was published after his death. He of course wrote it much before, but later उनकी wife ने publish किया था ये, so posthumously published the Prelude, and this becomes seminal. Then as you're moving ahead, we are coming to the Victorian period, guys. So now Victorian period, another seminal period, and that is why, because this was a period where scientific revolution, industrial revolution was on a steep rise. So because of this, kya steep rise pe hoga? The people who started earning money, becoming much more materialistic. There was class disparities, high class and low class, बहुत wide division. There was one capitalist class that was earning money, and there was one working class that was suffering in poverty. And these capitalists were working these working class people as just mere resources, dehumanizing them in every which way, and taking them as just hands that were helping them in getting much more money. There was such dehumanizing process that was happening. Now, during that period, what genre do you think will be the most appropriate? Novel. Why? Because novels were now reflecting the most realistic element. So moving ahead with this, we have the Victorian period, 1837 to 1901. So as I was discussing, that novels were the genre that was kind of reflecting realism in it. Now, literature responds to industrialization, empire, and class conflict of that period. Realism and moral earnestness are dominant and reflected in novels. So we do have, if you've heard of Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, George Eliot, William Makepeace Thackeray, all these were the novelists that were writing during the Victorian era, mirroring what was happening in the society, especially Charles Dickens, who very much wrote from the perspective of the working class. Okay, he became the voice for the voiceless. That is how Charles Dickens is addressed as. And you have Hard Times, and you have George Eliot's work, you have Thomas Hardy's work in your UPSC English literature. So tension between science and faith, that became very important. Children's literature, Gothic revival, and social critique flourished during that time. One more important element that I would like to say over here is, guys, कि 1859 में Charles Darwin का Origin of Species आ गया था. Now, Origin of Species, and as I'm sure everybody would be aware about, is about how it kind of shook the foundation of Christianity, as well as all the monotheistic religions that burgeoned, that kind of propagated the idea that we came from Adam and Eve. Charles Darwin said that no, we humans kind of have evolved through apes. Now this was a huge conflict that between church and science. Okay, so this is the reason there was great scientific temperament that was happening, but this happened during this period. Okay, so what are the seminal works that we have? Charlotte Bronte ka Jane Eyre, a feminist work, a very seminal work talking about the female identity, the choices of a female, the limited choices of female during that time. Then you have Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, again talking about the working class and the desire to have a high class status and all. In Memoriam by Alfred Lord Tennyson, and that is in memory written for his Arthur Henry Hallam, his very dear friend. This poem is in your course. And The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin, as I mentioned, a very seminal work. If you have not come across, even if you're a literature student or not, you must know about Charles Darwin, Origin of Species. And of course, The Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde in 1890. This was another seminal work by Oscar Wilde, talking about that, how this was all about degeneration of human values because of the modernist ideologies. Okay, so this is very much propagated in The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now, moving ahead, we have another work, and that is the modernist period. As you're moving, another period comes, and the modernist period is 1901 to 1945. So we can see both the First World War as well as the Second World War occurred during this period. And imagine the destruction that was caused during that period was mammoth. It was profound. It was unparalleled to anything that's happened in the human race. So fragmentation of form and rejection of linear narrative. Now you put in your own common sense, and if we see that if 2 world wars have happened in that specific era, so you can imagine what things would have been. How kind of literature would have been? Depressed, yes. Talking about the dejection of that age, talking about the debased values, जो decayed values हो रही थी, and the form was fragmented, टूटा था form. Thoughts were being narrated in a very stream of consciousness manner, which means कि जो भी हमारे thoughts आ रहे थे, वही हम लिख रहे थे. So stream of consciousness, experimental literature हो रहा था. Stream of consciousness एक novel लिखने का form था, जो कि वर्जीनिया वुल्फ, जेम्स जॉयस, विलियम फॉकनर जैसे लोगों ने लिखा था. And by the way, William Faulkner and James Joyce, they were Nobel Prize winners. Okay, so these different kind of works that was being written. Drama भी famous था, poetry भी famous था, novel भी famous था. This was an age when all the genres were famous in their own way. So fragmentation of form and rejection of linear narrative, psychological depth, interior monologue, and stream of consciousness. That was happening. Alienation. People at that time were getting alienated from the world. Because itna destruction ke baad, they were like, why are we living in this world? What is the purpose? Why have we come? Okay. Urban dislocation and First World War trauma, as well as Second World War trauma, experimentation in poetry and prose style, disillusionment with Victorian ideal. So, यहाँ पे हम लोगों को देखने को मिलता है the First World War trauma. Postmodern में हम लोग देखेंगे Second World War trauma, जो कि I think बहुत साल तक चला, और and this age is also influenced by that. So we will talk. So First World War trauma, we have war poetry that was being written, and a very different kind of fragmented work. Some of the seminal work that we have is Ulysses by James Joyce, 1922 का work है ये. A revolutionary stream of consciousness novel unfolding a single day in Dublin. Okay, so this is James Joyce, your Nobel Prize winners work. Wasteland, again written in 1922. T.S. Eliot, again a Nobel Prize winner. This was a poem written according to the modern age of that period. It's actually showing that how the world has become a wasteland. How there are no morals, there's no spirituality, there's no values, and we are coming almost to an end of an era. So this was Wasteland 2, The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, a poetic exploration of time, memory, and perception. Virginia Woolf, I've discussed this before, a very seminal feminist writer. Passage to India. Now we know that how colonizations were also being were a big question at that time, and especially when we talk about our own country. Then A Passage to India by E.M. Forster becomes very seminal. Why? Because it is kind of showing the clash as well as assimilation, the amalgamation of the Western as well as the Eastern world. The England and India. So E.M. Forster's Passage to India, very, very important work. There's a beautiful movie that's also made on this work. It's a very old movie because it's a very old novel, but very seminal in this time as well. It's a very important work. Dr. Aziz के बारे में है, and इनके जो दोस्त होते हैं Fielding के बारे में है, तो किस तरह से इनकी friendship होती है, the friendship between an Indian and one with an English person, and this is how the entire work goes. And yes, Waiting for Godot basically ये ये English में 1952 में publish हुआ है, लेकिन 1948 में आ गया था. And Waiting for Godot is a play, again in your UPSC literature, English literature options subject case course mein hai ye. And this play is about that how two people, Vladimir and Stigrin, are waiting endlessly for a person to come, and that person does not come. Again, a very seminal text for existential crisis. Okay, why are we in this world? What is the purpose of us in this world? Okay, so now moving ahead to another age, we have the present age that we're living, guys, postmodern period, that is 1945 to the present period that we are living. And yes, 1945 के बाद immediate decade हम लोग year देखेंगे 1950s, 1960s, they were completely influenced by the chaotic trauma of the Second World War. We know how difficult, how challenging that period was across the world, and how much it affected, it still affects us in today's time. So blending of genres, this became very important because now things were very different and genres blend होते, पोएट्री में ड्रामा आता, ड्रामा में पोएट्री आ रहा था, नॉवल एक प्रोज एक वर्स फॉर्म में लिखी जा रही थी. सो ब्लेंडिंग ऑफ genres, metafiction, irony, questioning the grand narratives and truth. Okay, so जितने भी जो questioning the grand narrative and truth. So is there God? Is even God there? Whatever questioning. So the questioning even of that, why is only white race important? All those questions have started coming. Why is there not importance to black human race? Why is West always pitted against the East? Why is East shown in a uncivilized and debauched manner? Okay, so these elements have started coming up, and that is the period जहाँ पे जितनी भी theories हैं, feminism, post-colonialism, postmodernism, post-structuralism, all these narratives started developing post-Second World War. Why? Because the question was that there cannot be any center. A man cannot be at the center and a woman cannot be at the periphery, at the margins. The white race cannot be at the center and the black race cannot be at the periphery, at the margins. So this is how people like that. We need to be more, we need to break these binaries. We need to break the binaries of black versus white, female versus male, dark versus bright. Okay, so these kind of binaries were being broken and diversity of voices was encouraged, that we got to include voices from across the globe. It's not only that white man's voice is important. Even Indian voice is important for people living in Caribbean literature is important. So is Australian, American, African, Japanese, everything. Intertextuality, pastiche and fragmentation, ये postmodern के elements थे, and increasing globalization. So guys, seminal works अगर हम लोग देखें कौन से, Midnight Children by Salman Rushdie, Indian writing in English का seminal work है, 1981 में ये आया, Booker Prize जीता, फिर 25 years later it again won Booker Prize. Okay, so this was a very, very important work, guys. This talks about Midnight Children. In fact, as UPSC civil servants, if you are looking for any book to read, please go ahead, read Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children, because it talks a lot about Indian politics as well as what India became after 1947. Remains of the Day, Kazuo Ishiguro, Japanese-American writer, very seminal work, talks about the trauma of the Second World War. Beloved by Toni Morrison talks about, race talks about that how the slavery, how it impacted. So it's very beautiful, poignant work where there is this character, Seti, where she kills her daughter. And because of slavery, because she's this black woman, she gives birth to a daughter and she kills that daughter. Why? Because she does not want her daughter to undergo the same process of trauma and depression that she went to as a slave. She kills her daughter, but that daughter comes back as a ghost, which is named as Beloved. Okay, so that's Toni Morrison's work. The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood. We all know Margaret Atwood, are very important. This is again a dystopian fiction, that talking about that how women do not have any agency on their bodies, talks about that. And then White Teeth by J.D. Smith, 2000 Workers, multicultural novel exploring identity, immigration, and so on. So there are many, many works of postmodern era. These are very few that I have mentioned, but I just wanted to give a very holistic idea of how the English literature, this subject has been divided into so many periods from 1000 years and so on. So guys, for much more such informative knowledge, full of knowledge videos, please go ahead with the course. And just to inform all of you, the course is, the admissions were closing on 18th May. That's 13th May. Okay, it's the 13th May, and you can use my code AR Live. I will be covering the entire UPSC English Literature option subject, and if you've taken it, we'll be talking about everything in detail. And presently, we're doing Charles Dickens' Hard Times. I'll be starting it today, actually, and that is how we'll be going ahead. So if you want to go, use my code AR Live. The price of the course is 14,999, and I hope to see all of you in the classes. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.